Hello and welcome to Chapter 7. So this is a really brief chapter, but the information in this chapter is really important. So we only have a couple slides here, but I'm going to take some time to explain it and make sure that you guys really understand this material. As we go forward into the rest of the semester, this information will be good for you guys to have. So spend a little bit of time talking about bone homeostasis. From A&P1, you should be very familiar with what bones are, long bones versus short bones, and all of their categories of bones. Also, the anatomy of bones. In A&P2, we're going to assume that you already are very familiar not just with memorizing the occipital bone from the femur, for example, but the internal anatomy of the bone as well. So if that's something you need to take a moment and review, this would be a great time to do so. So what we're going to focus on here, like I said, is growth and maintenance of the bone. When bone grows, it's going to grow in the long direction at the epiphyseal plate. So all bones, even the oddly shaped bones, have epiphyses in one respect or another. But it's easiest to think about long bones just because they're the stereotypical bone and they have very easily identifiable epiphyseal plates. So before we go too far, I think it's going to be important to review a little bit of terminology. So in a long bone, the epiphyseal plates are going to be at either end. It's not just one per bone, there's one at each end. And this is where the high level of mitosis occurs, allowing the bone to grow outwards. The bone does not grow from the middle. It grows near the ends, but not at the very end. You'll see in a diagram coming up. There are some other important zones that you're going to need to be familiar with. The first one is called the zone of resting cartilage. And this is going to be cartilage that's closest to the epiphysis. So the epiphyses, or epiphysis singular, is an end of the bone, where the diaphysis is going to be the long shaft of the bone. In the zone of resting cartilage, you're going to find resting cells. They're not doing a whole lot. They're mainly there as anchor points to hold the epiphyseal plate to the ends of the bone. The epiphyseal plate, as I mentioned, is undergoing a very high level of mitosis, and bone remodeling usually occurs with laying down of cartilage first, and then it's replaced with actual bone cells or osteocytes later. So the zone of resting cartilage is really important as kind of just an anchor or hold on point. Then you have something called the zone of proliferating cartilage, and these are basically just rows of baby cells. These are cells right on the epiphyseal line or the growth plate that are undergoing that mitotic division very rapidly. And they're young because they have just essentially divided from the parent cells to become new daughter cells. Then you have the zone of hypertrophic cartilage. And this is basically rows of cells that are just a little bit older. So these are the cells that are left behind as new cells are appearing. So we have the parent cells dividing into daughter cells, and these are the older cells that have just existed a little bit longer. So essentially there's a lot of matrix here, and it's beginning to calcify with the extracellular matrix that surrounds the osteocytes to make our bones hard and strong. So at this point, the chondrocytes are going to die. Remember, a chondrocyte is a cell that's going to be creating cartilage. An osteocyte is going to be a cell that is creating bone. And then finally, you have the zone of calcified cartilage. These are basically a super thin, tiny layer of cartilage cells that are dead, but it doesn't really matter because the matrix surrounding the cells is calcified. This is where we're getting nice, long, hard bones. All right, so how does all of this happen? How do we get new bone? Yes, we have this layer of cells at the epiphyseal plate that's undergoing mitosis, but the thing you have to remember, the vast majority of your skeletal system is actually dead. It's not living. The osteocytes are alive and they do have a blood supply, but they're not what gives your skeletal system strength and support. You have two specific cells that are really responsible for creating and maintaining, that's a key word, not just creation, but maintenance of the extracellular matrix, basically the calcium and the phosphate that wraps around the osteocytes to make your bones what we see as actual bones. The two cell types are osteoclasts and osteoblasts. So osteoclasts are going to break down the bone. So basically they are going to remove calcium from the bone and put it back into your bloodstream. Say, wait a sec. Why does this happen? We want calcium in the blood. Well, think back to the endocrinology chapter. Sometimes we don't have enough calcium in the blood. You have to have calcium in the blood. For example, you can't have neuronal firing. You can't release any action potentials and neurotransmitters without calcium. So if calcium's low, you have to get it from somewhere. Okay, so the goal is to increase absorption at the level of the gut, but if you're struggling with that, you can definitely mine calcium from your bones. This can be dangerous because then things like osteoporosis and bone weakness could potentially be an issue. We'll cover that in pathophysiology. But for now, just understand that your bones are constantly in this flux of being built up and being broken down. Built up, down. And this remodeling process is actually good for your bones. It makes them stronger and harder and more durable in the long run. Osteoblasts, on the other hand, they're the ones that are putting the calcium and the phosphate back into the extracellular matrix and making your bones hard again. So how do you remember this? I remember osteoblasts as blasts build bone, BBB. It's easy to remember. All right, so osteoclasts, on the other hand, this one is kind of strange, but you'll have to bear with me as I explain it. So I have cats, and I love my cats dearly, but I do recognize them for what they are. They are very destructive forces. Especially, I have a little bit younger cats. So they can get into things and just destroy things. So osteoclasts, starting with a C, I just think about cats breaking things down in total destruction. So that's how I remember the breakdown for osteoclasts. And then osteoblasts, blasts build bone, BBB, builds it back up. So you need to remember, you don't have to use my silly examples. I understand that. But in the long run, you need to do something to remember it. So that's my 2 cents. Take it for what you will. All right. So I mentioned this build up, breakdown, and that process is called remodeling. I've already talked about it a little bit, but there's a few more terms that are going to be important. The other terms that are important to know are bone resorption and bone deposition. And this is all really important for the whole homeostasis, making sure you have calcium in your blood, but it's also important because as your bones undergo remodeling, I already mentioned in the last slide, it makes them stronger. So bone resorption is the removal of bone. Resorption, removal, R and R. It's not too bad to remember. And this is done by the osteoclasts. Now, bone deposition is going to be the formation of bone, putting calcium and phosphate back into the extracellular matrix. So here's a fun fact, about 10 to 20% of your skeleton is replaced every year. So if you do the math, about every 5 years, you could all do bones. Well, not exactly, but you get my point. So there are some factors that are going to affect bone development, growth, and repair. So if you have the presence of these hormones, which you all do in your bodies, or we'll talk about these vitamins or growth hormone, we'll cover how each of these things are really important to maintain the extracellular matrix surrounding your bones and stimulate long bone growth before puberty. I should make a note on the previous slide. I won't go back so you don't get confused me flipping back and forth, but the epiphyseal plates are only active until puberty. When sex hormones, meaning estrogen and testosterone, get to a certain level, it actually closes off and silences the epiphyseal plates. You don't get any more growth after that. So whatever height you are at puberty, you will be that height for the rest of your life. All right, so it's really important to make sure that your body has all the building blocks that it needs. Otherwise, you can't be the height that maybe you were determined genetically. You won't have the appropriate growth and repair mechanisms if you don't have all of these factors in your body. For example, there's this huge push. You see this in the media, you see it in magazines. Women who are postmenopausal should take all these calcium supplements because calcium is really going to help bone maintenance and bone repair. Well, here's the long and the short of it. If you don't have vitamin D on board in your body, It doesn't matter a hill of beans. You can't do anything with the calcium if you don't have active vitamin D. So, for example, I mentioned in another lecture that I eat a ton of dairy. There's no shortage of calcium in my life, but I take a vitamin D supplement just to make sure that I have the appropriate level of vitamin D to buffer the calcium so I have proper absorptibility and utilization of the calcium that I take in. So vitamin D is really important. Vitamin A is also going to be important because it is going to help regulate osteoblast and osteoclast activity. If you don't have enough vitamin A, then your bone development will be slow and insufficient. Vitamin C, we really think about as being involved as a part of our immune system, but vitamin C is really, really important in making sure the bones are strong and calcium deposits properly. If you don't have enough vitamin C, you're at risk for something called rickets. In addition, your bones will not have the same strength overall, and collagen synthesis all over your body will be down. So collagen is really big in a lot of like face creams and serums. And the push there is to have a lot of vitamin C serums and creams to put on your face to make sure your collagen is where it should be in your face to prevent wrinkles. So it's the same thing. Vitamin C is not just something for your immune system. It's good for your skin. It's good for any part of your body that has collagen. It's good for your bones to make sure you're getting proper osteoblast activity. And then growth hormone. Growth hormone is really important for stimulating cartilage division and long bone growth before puberty. After puberty, it will still stimulate bone growth, but the epiphyses are closed. So now you're going to get growth outwards instead of growth longwards, if that makes sense. So your organs might get bigger, your nose and your ears, they continue to grow your whole life because they're cartilage, not bone. And growth hormone will be important for those things, but long bone growth essentially does stop. Thyroid hormone is also exponentially important. So thyroid hormone is going to stimulate replacement cartilage at the epiphyseal plate, and it's going to stimulate osteoblast activity. Your thyroid hormone upregulates your metabolism, so therefore it's going to want to upregulate things that are in the building or burning of ATP department, meaning osteoblasts. Now, parathyroid hormone is basically the reverse of this. It's going to stimulate osteoclasts and therefore bone breakdown and allow calcium to go back into your blood. I already talked about sex hormones, so we'll skip over this now, but physical stress is good too. So, and I'm not necessarily talking about stress from work or, a boss or even studying for exams. I'm talking about weight-bearing stress. So going to the gym, going for a run, the more you utilize your muscle and bone together, the more you actually stimulate bone remodeling and osteoblast activity. So I love these graphs. I have included them all over the endocrine chapter, and this is no exception. These are a great way to think about homeostasis. So these kind of loop-de-loos or figure eights here are an awesome way. So go through this on your own and make sure you understand it. So in this particular diagram, we're talking about blood calcium level, not bone density. So blood calcium level would be considered this normal or this average here in the middle. So let's just say your blood calcium level increases. So in my world, like I said, I eat dairy every single day, probably a couple times a day. It's a big part of my diet. So my blood calcium is going to increase because of the amount of dairy that I eat. And then my vitamin D supplement will be on board. So I have all of this calcium available. Well, because of all this excessive calcium, I have receptors in the thyroid gland that are going to sense this increase in calcium. Well, there's another hormone that I haven't mentioned. It's called calcitonin. So the thyroid gland is going to release calcitonin. Now, thyroid gland is going to release something called thyroid hormone in respect to generation of ATP and maintenance of your metabolism. The thyroid also releases calcitonin from C cells, which are different from the follicular cells that are releasing thyroid hormone. So calcitonin is essentially going to be released, and it's going to affect osteoblasts. So remember, blasts build bone. So basically what's going to happen now is the osteoblasts are going to take the excessive calcium in my blood and deposit it into my bones. This will allow my blood calcium levels to return towards normal or that homeostatic medium level. However, remember, your endocrine system functions slowly. It's slow to turn on, it's slow to turn off. So even though we have sensed normal, calcitonin's still working for a little while, so we might drive blood calcium levels a little too low. That's okay, because you have other glands, your parathyroid gland, that's going to sense the decrease in the blood calcium. The parathyroid gland is then going to release a hormone called parathyroid hormone. Some books call it parathormone. It's the same thing. And the parathyroid hormone is going to stimulate osteoblasts to begin working, and they are going to mine and remove calcium from your bones to put that calcium back into your bloodstream. So then you go back to this homeostatic medium again. And then the same process circulates again and again and again, and you're in this constant state of flux to stay in this constant medium level. All right, so I told you it was a super, super quick chapter. That's all I got for you on this. If you have any questions, please send me emails. I'll send you infographics or other websites or even additional explanations. I want to make sure you guys understand bone growth and bone maintenance and bone homeostasis. All important concepts that you will see again. All right, guys, have a good one.